So any inputs or comments on the minutes from October?
I just had a brief comment on 6-3 work plan review. I think they were talking about the green building codes. I volunteered to be on that subcommittee. I don't know if that was documented anywhere.
Yeah, I'll make sure. I'll make sure it's in there.
Any other feedback or inputs?
I move we approve the minutes as presented then, or as amended.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the October minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, so the meeting minutes from October of last year are approved. Okay, so public comment. Okay, so moving on to announcements and communications.
Yeah, so we were going to discuss the regular meeting schedule at the December meeting, but it was canceled. So we just went ahead and moved forward with your old meeting schedule, which has sort of always been your official meeting schedule, the third Wednesday of the month. Please let me know if there are any issues with that, but it seemed to work best for everyone to stay with that date. A quick update on the home energy assessment pilot program. We've been working with our contractor, Home Comfort and Energy Solutions. They've conducted between 10 and 20 assessments. I don't have the exact number at the moment. And we're working with them on scheduling the last few assessments. There's a chunk of the people that we had identified in the survey as winners to receive these free home assessments have not responded. And so we're going back and looking for new people within the survey who were interested in those assessments. Let us know if you're free during business hours and want to join one of those last assessments. I went on one. Chelsea and Jeff are planning to attend them as well. I thought it was really interesting to see how they do the assessment and kind of exciting to see the one that I went to. There was real potential for savings, so that was exciting to see. And the residents were excited to learn more about how they can save energy.
So how would we do that? I mean,
If you want to just coordinate with me, let me know. I can let you know when the next assessments are scheduled in the next couple of weeks, and I'll let our assessors know which one you want to go to. They're happy to have people join.
One question is, are all of the assessments single-family
Yes.
homes? Okay.
And there's this particular tool that they use, there's some parameters whether I think they can do a duplex, but not more than that. I think there's some things they can do and some they can't with multifamily buildings. So we hope to have a presentation with initial results and findings from this pilot in February. I'm not sure how much we'll have for you by then, depending on when we finish all the assessments, but we hope to have something to share. Any other questions on that pilot program?
How long is it taking them to do the assessment?
For each home?
Yeah, how much time?
I think it's an hour to 2 hours. I think they block off 2 hours, but it depends on the size of the home and how easy it is to access certain things. But yeah, between an hour and 2 hours.
Would you remind me our target date for completing all the assessments?
In the next couple weeks. Yeah, definitely by your next meeting. Any other questions? The REACH Code Subcommittee update. Staff is working internally on doing some research on REACH codes at this point, and we'll get back to you with some more information in the next couple months.
If I could make a request, although I'm not on the subcommittee, if I could get CC'd on the memos, I'd sure appreciate that.
Yeah, right now the subcommittee is inactive as we're doing our research, but yeah, absolutely. If we correspond with the subcommittee, we'll make sure to include you. East Bay Community Energy Update, the board is meeting tonight. The next couple months are kind of going to be the exciting time where they are looking at their power mix and setting rates. So they're starting that conversation tonight about what percentage of energy provided in their basic product is going to be carbon-free, what percentage is going to be renewable. And they're committed to having their basic product be lower than PG&E's rates, but they're having a conversation about how much lower that's going to be. I think it's about 2 to 3% is their goal. So that's exciting to see whether there's an opportunity to have the basic default product that goes out to people can be as carbon-free as possible. That would be our goal in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Is there a timeline for when that'll actually come out to customers?
Yes. Yeah, good question. So right now they have a timeline for municipal and commercial accounts in June as rollout, which is pretty quick. And then they're looking at residential accounts, rolling them out in fall or winter of next year. So there's a little bit more of a time frame, late 2018 time frame.
This next fall or winter?
This coming fall, 2018, or sometime in the winter. But they'll be setting residential rates through this process in the next month too. So by the end of February, they're hoping to know what rates are, and then that's an opportunity for all of us to talk about doing outreach, getting people to opt up, or just doing some general outreach so people know that the program's coming, and encouraging people to stay in instead of opt out.
Claire, you may have mentioned it, but the default option is roughly what percentage renewable?
They haven't. Well, so the default option they haven't decided yet.
Okay.
So I think they have 4 scenarios. The procurement team has 4 scenarios that they're bringing to the board, but I think there's some flexibility in that. So it's really this delicate balance of how much renewable, how much carbon-free, and what the price differential is between PG&E's basic product. So they're kind of they're going to be weighing the board priorities in the next month before deciding officially.
But we had a discussion about that, recommending 100% is the Albany default.
Right, yes. And so that's still a conversation. So right now, they're focused on, we can't have that conversation until we know what the rate is for the 100% renewable option. If the basic product ends up being 100% carbon-free, then maybe that's an opportunity to just focus on that. If not, then we can look at 100% renewable as a default. The timeline is really quick for commercial accounts, so that might be a tough sell too, once we know the rates. But we could also, there's more wiggle room in terms of the residential accounts and rollout, so we'll have those conversations soon. Dan Lieberman, some of you may know, was on the committee for many years, and he is now working for East Bay Community Energy. And he will be presenting to council on February 5th with an update. So you can either come or tune in on YouTube and check out that presentation with more updates from then. By then, they'll have a better sense of where they're moving in terms of those product mixes. Other questions on East Bay Community Energy?
Do they have a kind of a notification approach that's going on, like how it's going to be publicized and promoted? Do we have any idea on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely working internally on it. I don't have a lot of information yet, but hopefully that will be part of the conversation at the February 5th meeting is how that is. Right now, they're working with, they're starting to reach out to commercial accounts because that's the first big push for rollout. So they're reaching out to especially the large commercial accounts.
Okay, any other announcements or communications from the committee? I had one just note to make pertaining, I think, to 5-2. So I learned that the city of Boulder is very progressive in its energy efficiency programs, and so it has a program which is requiring some energy efficiency updates. So that's sort of like a RECO for residential and SECO for commercial. So those are hard, as we know, but I thought it would be interesting to learn more about that program. What Claire said is that they have a large staff and a large budget, so it wouldn't be something that we could, copy necessarily, but just to learn what they're doing would be interesting. Because I think as Claire mentioned, there are probably plenty of opportunities in our building stock, being an older, building stock in general.
Yeah, and I think I think the plan would be to bring initial pilot results to you next month, and then the subsequent meeting have a conversation about potential policies, and we could include some information about the Boulder program as an option too.
Great, yeah. Any other announcements or communications? We can go back to the fourth item. Any comments from the public? Okay. Thank you for joining. Hello. Welcome. Okay, if not, I think we can move on to discussions and action on several matters. So the first is an update presentation from Mia Kitahara of Stop Waste regarding climate action planning trends and best practices. So we're very happy to have Mia here this evening. I think you were a member of the Sustainability Committee not so long ago, correct? Yeah, so it's a pleasure to have you back.
It's wonderful to be back. Do I need to be speaking into the mic?
Yes, and Mia works for Stop Waste now and has been immensely helpful to us. She's a climate action planning expert, and we've been relying on
I
her.
wouldn't go so far as that. I convene the cities and talking amongst themselves. So yeah, as Sustainability Committee member Wei said, try to follow with that. I was on the original Sustainability Committee group, and I only recognized Tom from that. So it's really an honor and a pleasure to be back here. It's kind of like coming home. I lived in Albany for 20 years, and my mother still lives here. So yeah, it definitely is like, I have a soft spot. I wouldn't necessarily do this for all the cities. I mean, that's not true. I would do it for every city.
On the record.
We're being recorded. Okay, so as Claire mentioned, I have been with Stop Waste for 7 years now, and I've been working on a variety of things. The Bay Run program, I manage the multifamily program, but I also have continued to have this interest in climate action plans. So fostering the communication among the cities has been one of my exciting parts of my job. So recently, we understood that the cities were undertaking a CAP 2.0 process. A lot of them had their 2020 targets kind of coming. It's almost 2020, and so they were looking past that and trying to align with the state and figuring out what to do, and they wanted to talk to each other. So we did a survey a couple of months ago, asked a bunch of questions, hosted a workshop, and dug deeper and had a few discussions, a several-hour workshop. And so this is trends that we've found from that process, and some also beyond Alameda County trends and best practices. And yeah, I think the field has been evolving. So the first time we did the CAP 1.0, we didn't know too much, but I was still fiercely proud of the product that we had made. But I'm also very inspired by how much city staff and city members, committee members and things have really advanced. Even if it's been really difficult to implement some of the measures, just the level of sophistication that cities and local governments have now is impressive. And I think we're in a good position to move past 2020 and do something big post-2020. So anyway. So I'm going to talk about Albany in the context of the rest of the county. And I highlight here what your original 2020 targets were. Even then, I wouldn't say you, not we, were already leading. Had a more aggressive than average reduction target and adopted it, and one of the first ones to have adopted it in the time scale of all the adoptions that happened. And in Alameda County, we're one of the first counties where all of the jurisdictions had some sort of reduction strategy in place and adopted. So how are we doing to date? Right. Albany is doing better than average. I know sometimes we beat ourselves up for not doing enough. Nothing is ever enough when we're talking about climate change, but you're doing better than the average. Everybody is struggling, and we'll talk about kind of what those struggles are, or the themes that have come up. And I'll also pause here and talk about the potential shortcomings of looking at just this. So this is GHG emissions, and as you all know very well, there are a lot of kind of nuances and assumptions and modeled data and faulty data and barriers to accessing data and methodologies changing over time. Basically, all of the cities have struggled with this. And when I presented a graph with all of the cities projected individually on here, they said, whoa, 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 don't put that publicly because we're not comfortable with those numbers. Right? So all of the cities are in the same boat. And I think it also reflects the limitation of just looking at this. There are so many variables that influence this that are not local action. Right? So do you want to be measuring just the global trends that are affecting everyone, warmer climate? Do you want to be, taking credit for that, or do you want to really be focusing on the local actions? So that's one of the findings that we saw, and trends kind of globally that I'll be talking about. And one thing we found across the county is that people are not tracking anything but this, and they're doing it pretty much in 5-year increments. So you see 2005, 2010, 2015. Don't really know what's happening in between, and they're not tracking the actual implementation of the measures. Very few are tracking implementation. So here's an example of a local government that does track implementation, and it's the County of Santa Barbara. They have a very nifty interactive website that you should check out. So their recent update in September showed this emissions trend graph in an appendix. They didn't lead with this. They put this in an appendix, and it shows a pretty significant reduction, a 14% reduction. But then the most of the report focused around the measures and how much they've actually implemented each measure, and they track this. And what's interesting to note is that it doesn't total the same, right? So according to just emissions inventories, you have a 5-fold, 6-fold reduction compared to if you're just tallying up what you think your impacts were based on your local actions. So what's that delta? What's driving these decreases? This is a project that ICLEI is doing with DOE funding. This is an anonymous California city, real data, and they're trying to figure out disaggregate the emissions reduction and figure out what the drivers were. So I highlighted the ones that are really common across a lot of jurisdictions. Electricity fuel mix due to RPS or wet years has gone down. Heating degree days have driven lower methane gas use in homes and buildings, and vehicle fuel economy, which is really more state-driven than locally driven, are key variables that affect the emissions reductions. So this is giving us more of a clue as to why did this happen. And this tool will be available to all cities eventually when they're done with the project. And just today I saw CARB talking about their move in their framework for SB 375 away from having the metropolitan transportation agencies, planning organizations, the MPOs, focusing on a % reduction target and more on what you're actually doing. Tell us what policies you're doing and tell us how well you're doing them. So tracking implementation, not just focusing on the modeling, especially in transportation, there's so much modeling and uncertainty. And this I'm highlighting here, they showed this graph and I recreated it this afternoon because I thought it was so interesting that they say the main drivers are things that the MPOs are not really responsible for. The demographics, fuel prices, and socioeconomic factors are driving the changes, but really they want them to focus on transportation strategies and land use strategies that are part of their purview. So they're shifting their framework and their update that's legislatively required. So it's hard, right? Though we want to focus on implementation, but implementation is hard. And that is a common theme also. Across the jurisdictions, there were some, I left this open for them to describe, across all your measures, what has been helping you and what has been, hindering you. And top of the list for barriers is lack of staffing and internal funding. There's just not, implementing caps require a lot of resources, and there's just not enough. It wasn't planned that way. We didn't plan the resources into the cap. When council adopts the cap, they didn't have like a bill to go along with it that they had to allocate resources. That said, the things that have been helping are things like political will and community voice. Both are kind of what you all embody, and you can help to push and overcome some of the resource constraints that a city might have. So that was also a common theme across the cities.
So just for clarification, the
Yep.
political will is positive and negative, so does that
Oh, yeah.
mean that in some cities it's viewed as a plus and some it's viewed as a negative?
Exactly. And in one city, it was both. I think it depended on the measure or the council person or whatever, but it was, yeah, either they lacked it so they couldn't pass something like an ordinance, or there was enough political will to do something. Exactly. Both ways. Okay, so let's look past. Let's talk about the future and what we're doing next. And Albany, again, is leading, and this time by far, in your targets. Out of all the jurisdictions, so I didn't write all the jurisdictions' names on here because some are just some are adopted formally, but some are just staff guesses or staff inclinations. But Albany is the only one that has gone for carbon neutral or zero emissions, and I think that is bold, and I think it's a good move. You are aligning with the global leaders. So there's the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, which is all kind of cities that have committed to carbon neutrality or to some sort of 100% renewable energy situation. Those are clearly global leaders. And then at the COP23, C40 started to encourage their members to to sign on as carbon neutral cities. So you've got that list on the right side there. So you're in good company, very ambitious and progressive company. And I personally like the carbon neutral framing because it changes the reference case, right? So all of this measurement of GHG emissions that is really kind of uncertain is absolutely necessary if you're shooting for a percentage below baseline. If you're talking percentage below, of course, you need to know how much difference you made below your original baseline. But carbon neutral, I think you can focus more on the conditions that approximate carbon neutrality. So you can talk more about how many homes are carbon neutral, what percentage of our homes are carbon neutral, what percentage of our vehicle fleet, community vehicle fleet, is zero emissions, those kinds of metrics that are more concrete, and you can probably get better, more accurate data, and are very specific, not confounded with other variables. So what does that look like? What is C40 telling its members? C40 is telling its members this concept of deadline 2020, which is by 2020 you have to commit to these actions by 2030. So it's a kind of interesting way to frame it, but they are saying, forget about this analysis paralysis and go do these actions. And they highlighted 12 key opportunities, and depending on the city profile, like size, income level, and kind of innovation, they made recommendations for how much that city should push on each of these levers. So for its members, they did this theme of fewer measures but bolder measures. Is kind of a trend that is coming up. Here is Rocky Mountain Institute, who also talks about carbon-free cities, and they too had a recommendation. This time it's 22, which is a bit more, but again, it's much shorter than the average climate action plans that we saw the first time around. In big cities, like the ones that these groups are talking to, they had hundreds of measures. Here, I think in Alameda County, the average was still over 30 measures, even for the smaller cities. So this is looking at this group of cities, which I don't have listed here. They looked at immediately actionable measures, kind of it's been done, case studyable measures, impactful and relevant to this group of cities. And so we could do something similar in this region for smaller cities. These are, global cities, metropolitan areas. But that might be something that would be useful that we're considering doing. So let's come back locally and come back to the survey. And another finding from our survey was that the cities in Alameda County are doing this kind of for the altruistic reason, I guess, reduce as much GHG as possible, and they're really looking at these CAP 2.0s as continuing to be advisory documents and to support subsequent adoption of implementation. Right? I highlight this because it's in contrast to other parts of the state where they're just doing it for CEQA streamlining and for kind of compliance sake. So that might determine how you scope your scope for consultants regarding CEQA, and we can talk about that at another time. Another interesting finding is that there's alignment on expanding just beyond local mitigation measures. Everybody who responded, okay, so I got 10 responses out of 14 jurisdictions. Everybody said they were going to include climate change adaptation. That was a strong theme. And many said they were going to include consumption-based emissions and measures. And also equity kept coming up also in the workshop as a discussion. So I'm going to talk a few minutes about consumption-based emissions because this has become my pet passion, I guess, at Stop Waste, because it's related to materials. And it's why we're in this, in this conversation in the first place. So this is a Alameda County average per capita emissions traditional inventory. There's a missing piece. That is a huge blind spot. We don't include air travel most of the time. That's something that is included in a consumption-based emissions inventory. But more importantly, that's goods and food embodied emissions are ignored. So I call this our blind spot. In the traditional geographic inventory, you start with just what's happening locally. So in mostly in like an urban, consumer, residential-oriented place, you're talking about the consumption and disposal. This linear economy, though, looks at linear economy takes, makes, consumes, and disposes of goods, just kind of cradle to grave. And along the way, you have fossil fuels inputs unsustainably going in, and energy and material and carbon emissions coming out of that whole system. And when we just do a geographic inventory, we turn our eyes away from this whole upstream emissions category. And these emissions are, in theory, captured at the site of production or the site of extraction. If everybody is doing inventory, it should all match up. But oftentimes, those activities are in response to consumer demand. So the consumer has some leverage. We should do something to impact all of the upstream emissions. But it's hard to quantify. But fortunately, the Air District commissioned UC Berkeley's Cool Climate Network to do a consumption-based emissions inventory for every jurisdiction in the Bay Area. So this is ready to pull off their website and plug into your next inventory or your climate action plan. And we've created a 3-page, very simple template to be able to add this lens. And what we're recommending is not to replace the original inventory, because then you would lose some of the local production, like commercial and industrial emissions, because this is focusing on household end use consumption. But this is a very useful lens, and it creates a complete picture, I think, of all the places that the community can have an impact globally on emissions.
So I'm not really following that back up. So that's showing embodied energy emissions in products people consumed?
Yeah, so we can look at what this looks like, and I'm sorry, the categories aren't showing up. But essentially there's transportation. So I color-coded this based on what's typically included in a geographic or a traditional inventory, and then what's excluded, and then maybe partially included in the commercial sector, slanted. So for example, in the transportation sector, vehicle fuel, direct emissions from vehicle fuel is included. We include that, but we don't include some of the upstream related emissions for well-to-wheel, they say, for producing that fuel, or the manufacturing and repairing of the vehicles, and then air travel we talked about. In another category, like food, it's all the agricultural emissions and the land use change emissions and the shipping and processing of food that we consume here. So you can, this lends itself to strategies like promoting meatless Mondays, for example, or getting school districts to consider low carbon diets, things like that. and just raising awareness, really. Some jurisdictions have found it useful as a kind of publicity and empowering message, right? It's not just do a home energy upgrade and get an EV. It's also think about your diet, think about consuming things more sustainably. Yeah.
If there was like a 10% reduction in meat consumption in Albany, would there be any way to detect that in any data?
That's a really good question, and the answer is no right now. But it's kind of a chicken and the egg, right? Nobody's asking for that data for emissions purposes because we're not using this methodology. Yeah, but the good thing is that players much bigger than us, like C40, are going this direction too. So their recommendation also, I think at this point, is to just add the lens. Just for informational purposes, you don't necessarily set your targets based on this, but you include it as an educational piece, and maybe eventually the data will become better. Okay, so what do we do? And this is the end of my kind of materials conversation. This is our new focus. It's really taking the reduce, reuse, recycle hierarchy seriously, and talking about a circular economy where things are perpetually cycled without a lot of material inputs and without a lot of waste going out. And things are designed for that system. It's not just that we force things into recycling streams, that they're designed without the concept of waste in the first place, the cradle-to-cradle concepts, and that all of the energy that's going into that whole process is renewable. So this is a really exciting new thing. Stop Waste is an Ellen MacArthur Foundation member, one of the only government members in the US, and we're very excited to see where this goes, and we're participating in advancing the knowledge on this. So I'll conclude with some of the high-level findings, and I'm happy to share more resources, or I think Claire has some more notes that we produced on this from the workshop. So the overall CAP 2.0 recommendations are to do fewer measures, more flexible measures, not so prescriptive and specific technology focus, because we don't know what's going to come. But yeah, fewer so that you can really focus on doing those few measures, biggest impact measures. We're looking at systemic changes, not just incremental amounts, but looking at the long haul and what does it mean what does a carbon neutral city look like? And what does that systemic change look like? And then implementation metrics being baked in to the plan so that you can track implementation. We didn't think about that the first time. And implementation resources should be clearly allocated or specified in the plan so that the city knows what they're committing to. And then within each sector, a lot of really interesting, exciting things happening. The energy sector, we need to become much more sophisticated in understanding of how the grid operates, and I think a lot of players are in this space getting on top of that. So yeah, so community scale, kind of what does Grid 2.0 look like, and what can local government do to support that? And obviously, electrification is a new thing, storage is a new thing. Those things are new technologies that we didn't consider the first time around in time of use. In the transportation sector, there's a lot of market forces driving those emissions trends down or up. So just understanding those market forces and focusing on the city's unique role and this concept of ensuring equity, because that could get lost in just hurrying to the electric automated vehicles and people still having 2-hour commutes.
What does that mean, focus on the city's unique role?
Unique role, like parking roles, not necessarily advocating for more EV adoption, just educational, because the OEMs might be taking care of that. But yeah, focusing on what can only the city do, like parking restrictions and things like that. And then in the waste sector, as I was talking about circular economy and focusing upstream and starting to address low carbon consumption. So thank you for your time. I hope that was new information, or at least helpful.
Can we get a copy of the presentation?
The copy of the slides?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to send them if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
I'll send them out.
Happy to take questions, or you guys can move on.
I just want to comment that it was very interesting in your presentation that since I've only been involved about a year with the committee and came in and was looking at CAP and the next steps and everything, and you seem to, I haven't heard a lot other than what Clara's brought in of what other cities are doing and how it's going, but it seems like we're kind of hitting the same thing. You know, we've seen, wow, we had this whole plethora of all these great ideas. Some of them give little gains, some are more impactful. How can we get more bang for the buck? Because, you know, the time and energy it takes us to try to implement these with very little resources is, so hearing that thing about, you know, focused measures, fewer, more significant ones was really kind of reinforced in my mind, yeah, that's what we want to do. And that's how we should go with like a 2.0. Then moving into kind of these upstream things and everything, that gets a little more daunting, you know, and it's like, whoa, you know, so, I mean, I think we would be looking a lot for resources and how you even analyze how we in Albany do things. And it's very complex now, especially with, you know, people buying off the internet and all this other kind of, I mean, the changes are so rapid now, it's really kind of almost shocking.
That is true. That's a really good observation. And I think the impacts are increasing of our consumption because of some of those trends that you're talking about. And that may be additional reason to tackle the difficult subject. I don't know. I will say that one thing about the consumption-based emissions is that some of the measures are more affordable. You know, like switching away from meat or choosing to use your sweater twice as long. Those things are easy to do and affordable. It's not limited to only people who can afford, you know, big energy upgrade or an EV. So they are, in terms of community investment, they could have much bigger impact for the buck, or bang for the buck.
Mia, I'm curious about I really like the idea of a smaller number of measures. And I'm curious if there is data to back up each one of the ones that the two groups that you mentioned recommend, that shows like why that's an important lever, and any kind of data to support the efficacy of doing that particular measure.
Yes, I think there is. I haven't looked in the appendices of those reports, but the RMI one used that criteria that I described, like the 4 criteria. So those criteria have a subjective quality to them, too. I think it's kind of just identifying best practices. Yeah, and then the C40 one, I'm sure there's a lot of data that went in behind those.
And they have cities that have done them, and they're measuring the impact. That's kind of what I mean. So you have a city that says, I'm going to do this particular thing around transportation. And they have data that say, here are X number of cities, or these cities that did this, and here's the result. And
Maybe.
here's how they do it.
Maybe.
'Cause I think that.
I hope so. I think the RMI one has, because it's impact and case study is what two of the criteria were. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because I think that'd be important for us as we're like thinking about, do those 22 measures apply to us?
Yeah.
And ones that are going to be a challenge, be able to, you know, if you're going to take those on, to already have some data to support doing something like that, obviously makes it easier to adapt.
That's a very good point. And I was kind of hoping to get that out of our survey process. Each of the surveys was customized with each city's, all of their CAP measures, and the assumptions that went into what full implementation meant. And then it asked, how far are you, or how much impact has this measure had? And people could not answer it because they weren't tracking implementation. So I totally hear what you're saying, and coming up with best practices with actual measured impacts would be ideal. I don't know that we have access to that right now, if we were going to do one locally, if we wanted more locally applicable measures.
So thank you very much, Mia, for coming in and sharing this really great work. So one comment would be, I think the information or the knowledge of what types of consumption have the largest footprint or the largest environmental impact is very important. Like clearly beef has a larger footprint than, say, some other forms of protein. But more generally, it could apply to, the iron and steel or things which are imported. But my question is there getting back to stop waste, is there a key focus area? I mean, clearly waste and getting to zero waste perhaps, which ties into your circular economy slide, but do you have any programmatic priorities or key focus areas like in the near term for 2018 or any of the things which are related potentially to what you've shown tonight?
Yes, we have. We underwent a prioritization exercise last year, which set our priorities for 2016 through 2018, and some of them align with this. In the waste sector, we're focusing on organics. Clearly, it has a downstream as well as an upstream component, and we're focusing upstream there. So we shifted from focusing just on composting to food waste prevention, and a lot of messaging about food waste prevention has a lot of other good co-benefits. And side note that if you feel really good about composting, sometimes you waste more food because you're like, oh, it's just going to compost. Anyway, so we're trying to shift that messaging, and we're looking at upstream strategies also for the built environment sector. So talking about whole building LCA at the time of construction and constructing things so they have longevity and adaptive reuse over time and they don't have to be dismantled. And when they're dismantled, they're deconstructed as opposed to demolished, those kinds of things. So those are our priorities for the waste side. On the energy side, we continued our priorities, the Energy Council's priorities from previous years, and added 2 years ago fuel switching or electrification and grid harmonization kind of. Thanks.
Does Stop Waste, or you in particular, have the ability to help us through the process of RCAP 2.0?
We're looking for external funding to help us do that. So we're pretty constrained in if it has a consumption-based emissions inventory nexus, we can justify it more than if it doesn't. So if it's got a clear materials nexus, we can help more.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or comments from the panel?
I have a question, and I guess this thing I'm struggling with a little bit is that this is a great presentation, by the way. I mean, I think you've done a great job of laying this all out. I'm trying to think about how what we do in a CAP relates to a larger regional consideration that affects how the region performs. And the specific thing I'm dialing in on is sort of Planned Bay Area and how the recent version completely punted on the mismatch between the rate of job creation and housing production and where it's being located. And that's obviously, we're a piece of a much larger discussion on that. But the reason I focus on that is that if you look at their data, you can't even get to the state's current goals for greenhouse gas reduction if that trend's not fixed, and they've kind of punted on it. So how does that topic get incorporated into a CAP 2.0 effort, or do we sort of say, well, that's a different issue and we need to approach it through a different process or in a different way?
I think it's a key strategy, the housing job balance, if I'm understanding you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting jobs housing balance, but I mean, the point is, we as Albany, I mean, obviously we're a suburban community, we have a pretty gross jobs housing mismatch right now, and it's gonna be hard for us to fix that, but I think that at a regional level, you can address that, and there's a lot that you can do that's just we're kind of choosing not to do. So, and this is part of the challenge of that kind of a question is, I mean, certainly there are things that we can do, but we're not going to, by ourselves, kind of get to some ideal ratios. Kind of collectively, everyone needs to get there.
If you have the appetite to advocate regionally, I think that more voices helps. What I had mentioned about SB 375 and Planned Bay Area, and they're shifting focus to implementation will help. Some of that is that they're not able to just say market trends are taking care of it. They really have to do what their purview is and their role in it. I think some of that will come to the surface, maybe painfully, but it'll come to the surface. And then I think the way the inbound, outbound modeling also creates a reason for you to care about where the housing job balance is for Albany residents. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I don't know, but that's a good point.
Okay, any other thoughts or questions? not, we'd like to thank you very much again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
Should I leave this up? You guys-
Okay, so our next agenda item is the discussion of the draft climate mitigation and adaptation plan request for proposals. And the recommendation here is to recommend that council authorize the release of a request for proposals for consulting services related to essentially Camp 2.0, I think.
Right. So Chelsea and I are going to give a brief overview of the RFP that was attached to your agenda, and then we can talk through if you want to provide any comments to the RFP or other discussion you'd like to have. Mia highlighted Albany's ambitious goals, greenhouse gas reduction goals, the first of which is included in our current climate action plan goals. And we're continuing to work toward those. The second two are included in our general plan. And as we continue to work toward the 2020 goals, we also want to begin thinking about those long-term goals. The City Council's strategic plan includes a measure to develop a new climate mitigation and adaptation plan for these new aggressive reduction targets. And the new CAP should take a new approach, focusing on relevant, actionable measures and address deep decarbonization principles. I think Mia's presentation tied into this really well. I think there's a lot of things that cities are doing with their CAP 2.0s that are moving in the right direction and will make a CAP more easily implementable for staff and for the Sustainability Committee as well, especially as there's been a lot of lessons learned in the past 10 years of climate action planning. We've been unsuccessful in obtaining additional grant funds for this planning process. Mia actually submitted a great grant application last year to the CEC that we were disqualified from. And we don't see a lot of opportunity for grants for planning. We're working right now to identify some internal funding, including some funding through some grants we have from Stop Waste, actually, to try to help fund this internally. Ultimately, council hasn't approved whether we can use internal funding for this planning process yet. But if we do, we imagine we're not going to be paying the big price tag that some communities have paid, hefty sums for CAP 2.0 planning processes. We don't think that's necessary in Albany, especially if we don't have an external grant for that. So we're actually asking the consultants to provide some opportunities or options for staff to do some of the work. We imagine that we'll end up probably doing a lot of the community engagement process through working with the Sustainability Committee and other committees and commissions. We think that's something that we're well poised to do. So we imagine some of this will be done by staff, but we'd still like consultants and their expertise to help through the planning process. You'll see that the narrative in our scope is not prescriptive to allow for creativity and flexibility. We're curious to see potential approaches from consultants on how to go about this process in a small community. And Chelsea's been working on drafting the scope of work, so she's going to go over the basic process we envision for the project.
Okay, so first and foremost, we think that the project should begin with a review of existing documentation, which will include our general plan, our Climate Action Plan 1.0, our city's active transportation plan, local hazard mitigation plan, our greenhouse gas inventory, and much more. From there, an analysis of state and regional programs should be performed to determine the appropriate role for Albany in the next phase of climate action. Best practices for long-term climate action should also be analyzed. And finally, community outreach should be performed, including engagement of city council, as well as multiple different commissions and committees. So our draft plan. After the initial research and outreach phase.
Do you mind going back to the previous slide? So that second bullet, that could be a huge scope. Right?
Yes, a lot of this work has already been done. we're going to rely on me a little bit for the best practices. Well, I mean, some of it, we already have kind of a sense of some of that. And there's other agencies have already analyzed state and regional programs. So it's,
So my question is, are you asking the consultant to do this? Because that's going to drive your costs later. I thought that's what you're showing us, what the scope for the consultants.
right. Yes. We'd like them to compile state and regional programs and best practices, but I'm saying that I think we're going to provide them a lot of that information already.
Or encourage them to like rely on other people's compilation of that as opposed to doing original research.
Exactly.
So our draft plan, after the initial research and outreach phase, a draft plan will be created. And we believe it should include the following elements. It should provide a clear definition of carbon neutrality. Mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and circular economy strategies should be fully developed and incorporated into the plan. And metrics should be clearly defined and prioritized. The draft plan will be reviewed internally with responsible agencies, department, and staff. And from there, the project schedule should allow time for public comment on the draft plan. This public feedback will be incorporated into a final plan, which will go to council for review and adoption.
The ultimate plan should include a prioritized list of community-supported strategies that reach all sectors. And we're envisioning that each strategy could include responsible agencies, departments, and staff, as well as actionable steps and even possible funding sources, sort of like an action plan. In terms of process, staff plans to bring this RFP to council hopefully in March for approval after we receive feedback from you. We'll review proposals and schedule consultant interviews after that time. And we'd actually like tonight if the sustainability committee could decide on 2 representatives to sit on panel interviews for those consultants. And once the firm has been selected, the sustainability committee will receive progress updates at monthly meetings and have many opportunities to inform and provide feedback on the plan, be instrumental in that planning process. So we welcome your comments and feedback on the RFP before we bring it to council.
So I'll just, I mean, it's a lot to sort of absorb, and it's in very broad terms. I mean, there's very broad brushstroke stuff going on. I've sort of reinforced what Tom said. That some of this stuff seems like it would take very large amounts of effort to analyze lots of stuff and know how the cities responded to Cap 1 issues. And I'm wondering, do we want to guide them to some more focused areas, as we saw in the previous, like electrification and transportation issues that we know work here, rather than just sort of a broad, what did all these other cities do, but what's sort of more focused on our community? I think we've had some successes, but other things have kind of fallen flat. So my thoughts are always that the 2.0 should be more tailored to, okay, we know certain measures are going to be more successful. There's other things that'd be nice to do, but they're not going to generate the results or as much result as we really, for the effort that we're putting in them. Anyway, that's just my thought. There's a way we can focus it a little more, or define it maybe a little more, so it isn't so broad.
That would be my comment also, because it's looking for mitigation, adaptation, resilience. So many themes are there which are challenging, because resiliency, I don't even know what those metrics are. So someone would have to spend a good amount of time just kind of crafting and almost inventing some new metrics, which may again be somewhat city-specific. So that's just echoing Nick's point. The other question is, it seems like the scope is much broader than, say, the 2020 cap, or the cap for 2020, because it's going out deeper into the future, and it's also going from 25% down to 0. So I'm just wondering how do you guys view the scope and the budget? I mean, just practically speaking for this versus the 2010 cap. It just seems like there's much more going on here, potentially.
Yes, it's true. But at the same time, I think focusing on fewer measures could help that piece and that focus. And unlike the first cap, there's a lot more that people are doing. And I think, like Nick mentioned, a couple of focus areas that the Sustainability Committee has already identified. I think a lot of us already know what some of those measures might be for Albany, for carbon neutrality.
I'll offer a couple thoughts. So I think, as you know, because you've been down this path before, breaking up the consulting the community engagement piece is a great way to kind of try to control the budget and the impact. And certainly, I think that to the extent, and I think there's a lot of people in Albany who have this experience, including myself, who have experience being facilitators and running kind of public meetings. And so if we can recruit the people in town that experience, I think that could be helpful. Another thing that I've seen recently, there's always the challenge when you do meetings to who shows up, and there's a real generational split as to who goes to kind of public meetings versus other forms of engaging folks. And so to the extent we can use the web to kind of find other forms of engaging opinion, and when I suggest that, I don't mean getting complicated and spending a ton of money on web design, I just mean finding ways that you can kind of give people a chance to kind of have ongoing input during this process, and also put out resources and maybe even sort of help the schools figure in their plans and so on. Turning to the RFP, I think you've done a good job laying this out, and I think that, when you're looking to get to the consultants as the experts, I think it's actually wise to have it open-ended because you want to get their best ideas, but I think the challenge is to lay out what are we trying to accomplish so they understand what we think the endpoint's going to be. One question I have is on the selection criteria. You've listed a lot of criteria, and there's not really any kind of weighting in there, and some of these are kind of more general, how do you kind of do consulting assignments as opposed to tailored to the kinds of things we're trying to get out of this effort. And so to the extent maybe you might want to think about trying to narrow your criteria to the extent it's relevant, include some weighting, but also maybe focus the criteria more on kind of what we want to see the end product be and kind of what it accomplishes. And then I think my only other suggestion, and this is kind of a technical thing, but I didn't see it in here, but generally, I think when you're getting a scope of work, it's really advisable when folks give you, task 1, 2, 3, to ask them to give you a cost proposal that breaks out by task, by individual, so it really helps you understand kind of how the budget's allocated between the proposed tasks as well as the individuals within the firm.
That was when I read this the first time, I was thinking, we call that a resource-loaded work plan. So it's a spreadsheet that shows the staff, the task, how many hours. That way you and the rate that they're charging for each of the staff. So it's a way of.
And consultants are very used to doing that.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Regarding the selection criteria, does anyone do you have ideas about selection criteria that you would like to see in the RFP?
I like Ron's idea of a vision statement, or some vision. This is the end result that we're looking for, and something specific enough that explains not just that we're trying to get the carbon neutrality, but I'm not sure how to word it, but some vision of what that looks like for all of you.
Wait, under selection criteria, I'm not following.
Well, I think your point was that including something that is, we have a, well, why don't you say?
I guess, it's a little bit hard for me to wordsmith from day. This is the kind of thing you need to sit down and kind of look at the word processor and play with it. But I guess one way I would say it is that, if you look at kind of the presentation we heard, and I think you have a lot of these ideas in the RFP, that's kind of where we're trying to get to. So for example, if, one of the outcomes we really want is to kind of have a way of doing the cap that's going to help us get to kind of a tightly defined and well-developed set of implementation measures and metrics. Let's make part of the criteria, as an example, the extent to which the proposed scope of work would accomplish that. And the reason I say that is I think that, and I'm not sort of saying specific wording here, but I'm trying to introduce that idea because I think you give a clear signal to the consultants that, look, your scope of work should really be demonstrating how you get there, as opposed to kind of just more general, criteria.
Right, because I think, thank you for clarifying that, because I think otherwise you're going to get a whole lot of experience without an idea of what, how they envision it, potentially. You could get that. But generally, I do like RFPs that are vague, because you don't want to, you really do want to see what their ideas are.
Just to follow up on that, so the selection criterion, so just the evaluation, I think they should also outline how they would approach this, and where they see the most benefit of resources. This falls into what Ron was saying about having sort of a breakdown of the process. I think they should, we're not specifically telling them the process. We're saying, well, it should cover these things, but what would their process be? And how would they put it together efficiently and in a manner that really got the data and struck at what we're trying to accomplish? I think that having them sort of spell that out, and that we would and sell it to us, would be part of evaluating their ability to give us what we want. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That does.
Is there a budget defined for this yet, or is that still under?
Part is to be determined.
And you're saying you're still trying to call together money, so you don't know how much you have to spend.
Right, we're
Okay,
still
okay.
working through that.
Okay.
So I think, just to finish the thought, it behooves all us to appear at the council meeting and advocate for a larger budget.
And do you put a page limit on the proposals, or how do you handle that?
Generally speaking, no. It may not help their proposal to have a long, complicated submission,
Sure.
but we'd like to see how people respond, independent of our guidance.
Any other thoughts or questions?
Were we asking them to provide examples of previous work for, just to see how they put it together and how organized and concise, that kind of thing, something we can evaluate? Does that come under?
I'd have to look at the RFP again. I think that we ask for relevant projects, probably.
Yeah.
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 You might define,
not be a-
that they give 3 that they've done in the last,
Right.
2 years that are similar in an analysis task, to what we're asking. Yeah.
Actually, I know this may sound flip, but I've actually been pushing this at my place, which is, in terms of submittals, just getting PDF submittals without getting paper submittals.
Yeah, that's what we've been doing too.
Good.
Any comments from the public? Awesome.
This is a question/comment.
Can you go to the microphone, please? Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. Hello. My name is Sarah Ketterett. I work with a local nonprofit that does school garden work with high schoolers. So I'm currently working at Albany High School.
Great.
And it's my understanding that they're currently talking about remodeling the school, part of the school grounds. And part of that remodeling, I'm hoping, would be including an area for students to participate in gardening. It would be my dream for that to result in edible food that would actually go back into the school cafeteria, so that students would be able to produce some very local produce that they would then consume on campus. And there is a very big state grant to make this happen, but I don't know what the timeline is for your committee on this. I think proposals for that are due by March 1st, and it's something that I think the school board would have to apply for. So I don't know what this committee's role is in that at all. But that is what comes, that's my public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so do we need a motion to recommend this go to council, or can we just basically approve that this can go to council?
Either way, I think is fine. And then also, if you want to discuss if anyone would be available to sit on the panel, selection panel as well. Yeah, it would be during business hours.
Yeah, I can't do that.
I can participate in that. It depends on days. You know, and-
We would definitely coordinate with schedules.
Okay, I can do that. So we'll have, I mean, this was very draft right now. What's the schedule for before it goes to the city council?
Our hope is to bring it to council in early March, we're thinking.
Early March, that was it, okay. Still need one more person, right?
If someone else is interested and available during the day, absolutely.
Okay.
We can have just one representative too, is fine.
I'm fine with it moving forward. Anyone who is not has any issues with it moving forward?
We don't need to make a formal motion, do we?
I think we're,
If everyone's okay with moving forward with the RFP?
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
feedback.
Thank you for putting that together. Okay, so the next agenda item is 6-3, which is the greenhouse gas inventory subcommittee presentation. So that would be myself, Nick, and Stephanie. And
I'll leave it to you.
so I submitted something. I'm not sure if I can project or if you can project for me. I thought that there was a way to project from here, but I'm not seeing the adapter. You know, Claire?
Is that what you emailed to all of us, though? It's the
I
attachment.
emailed it to Claire.
I don't think so. Do you want to go to the podium?
Okay, I can do that. Let's see, what do I need? It's just this. Yeah, okay.
Okay, have that.
Okay, and is it here?
Do you want to plug your computer in there?
Oh, I can do that, yes.
Actually, I got it on my phone. If you want.
I'm not sure if I have the right adapter. I don't have HDMI on my computer.
I just recently headed up a $1.1 million
Well, maybe so.
We're part of the
Claire?
We got a big fat grant from the feds and we did a local match.
That was in an email that went to us. It was an attachment.
So I'm getting like,
Yeah, I just think he's just trying to bring up that doc.
so I had somebody, we ended up. We can do VGA. We ended up with like.
Oh, maybe,
It was like
are you,
20 each.
Max, is it the document that you sent to me?
Yes, it was the
Okay.
the Word document that I sent to you, yes.
Don't have my.
So there is a VGA over there?
I can,
Because I recall I've done that before in the past.
yeah, the system's.
Just not sure where it is.
Is there a VGA coordinate?
Or if not, maybe somebody have a thumb drive, we could sort of do it that way.
foiled by technology again.
Just
It
like
helps and hinders at the same time.
magically appears.
I'm amazed late night tech support.
You
Jeremy,
always
don't-
need a person.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Jeremy, do you work 80 hours a week or something? Jeremy, when do you not work?
It's going back to a little hot they have for him.
Yeah.
There you go, you're good.
Okay, so we're online, so sorry about that, everyone.
Excellent job.
So I'm giving the update for the CAP subcommittee. We had meant to give this update earlier, but we didn't have a meeting, so apologies we didn't have the meeting in December. And I think one of the points to make is that in our meeting a couple of months ago, or maybe a month ago, we really were reaching some of the same conclusions as Mia, which is hopefully not paralysis by analysis, but that's a concern with this presentation, but also that we did feel that for the city there could be a smaller set of key initiatives, so namely CCA, just getting the word out for that, zero emission vehicles, so transportation, and then electrification, building decarbonization through electrification, and to the extent that energy efficiency measures can be done, but I think those are very challenging to be done on a voluntary basis. So we're kind of coalescing around, a smaller number of measures and also more outreach and community engagement, which is part of the charter of the committee that we'll probably talk about in a few minutes. So, but basically what I was trying to do was just to give an update from the CAP subcommittee viewpoint on the greenhouse gas inventory, and just kind of looking at the staff memorandum from September. So this is a few months out already, but just to look at what has changed and trying to understand better the basis for those changes. And the second part was to update the inventory that the Sustainability Committee has been maintaining for the past 3 to 4 years, and we've also presented to council. And I know that there's a bit of a schism here, but I just thought, just for information, just to bring the committee up to speed as to what we've been doing in the past and what it looks like from our perspective, and to compare that to the staff perspective. Okay, so let me just go to what I prepared. So this is not in slide presentation, unfortunately. It's a lot of text, but I can hopefully just walk you through it. So the first thing is just that the staff memo has a 2005, 2010, and 2015, so 3 data points. So I think that from the CAP, the year 2004 should be the baseline year, so that's just 1 point. So I think we should align on the baseline year as 2004, as stated in the CAP document. And also I think that when you have only discrete data points in the inventory, then you lose some of the trends due to a warming climate. So what you'll see in my update is that you see very sharp decrease in emissions starting in 2014 and 2015, and that's attributed largely to a warming climate, so much warmer winters and much lower natural gas consumption in particular, like 20% in the residential sector, so a huge signal. And that's very difficult to attribute to any other cause, but we know that the climate is much warmer, and in particular, the field station in Berkeley is showing that signal, so pretty conclusive, I think. And I think that we can be tasked with filling in some of the years, so that's fine. I think Claire had made the comment in an email today that Stephanie and I can fill in some of the years in the staff update here. Okay, so we can add other years. So the other key point to make that we discussed in, I think, September is that this transportation number, the baseline of transportation emissions, is much higher. So this change is due to a change in the methodology for how transportation emissions are tracked. And it has to do with whether your travel is tracked within city boundaries and how your VMT or your vehicle miles traveled is tracked when you go from within Albany to, say, Oakland, to Walnut Creek, to Berkeley. And so there's a methodology which is well documented, and I think it's an ICLEI methodology, but it's a different methodology which was just implemented for this version of the staff greenhouse gas inventory. So if you look at this number for 2005, the emissions is 39,000. And in the old approach, it was only, I think, 21,000. So it's nearly a doubling of transportation emissions. So I'm not saying that we have to throw this out or this is wrong. I'm just saying that it would be great if we as a committee could understand exactly what's under the hood here, because I tried to look at it. It wasn't completely obvious to me what was going on. But I think it just basically has to do with we are being credited, or whatever the word is. More of the travel is attributed to Albany drivers than it was in the past, essentially. And whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing, I think it would just be great if we could understand that. So if you know anyone who could help us to understand that within Stop Waste or within ICLEI, that would be great. We can also within the committee try to understand that, but if somebody, someone clearly put in a lot of thought. And within the ICLEI documentation, there is a note saying there's an alternative method, which I think we had been using before, is my interpretation. So it's just a difference in methodology, but it's a very important point. And the point is that it changes our baseline level significantly. So our baseline level, without that change, was down around 16,000, and now it's 81,000. So it's a big difference. So I'll just pause if there are any questions, or everything is reasonably clear thus far.
So the thought I always had is, if we're going to do apples to apples throughout, how we evaluate everything, it should just be consistent. So the point would be that if, again, I think this is all rolling towards presenting to the council and bringing them up to date. How are we doing? What was the success with CAP 1.0, and where are we at on our goal to, I guess, eventually net neutrality, being completely carbon neutral. So, if we have certain measures that were established as a baseline, if we deviate from those, either we just have to clarify it, or we go back and say, well, this adjusted to the new one, so we're all looking at the same thing. It just seems like it's a point of clarifying that. Would that work in your mind?
Yeah, I think we just want to clarify and understand it. I mean, I'd rather not just take it and say, well, we just changed the methodology, so this is the new number. I'd like to understand it and, just see if it makes sense, or if we think that we should use the other methodology. I think it's just for our own understanding. And if it's the case that all the other cities have adopted this, like El Cerrito comparable to Albany if they've adopted it? I mean, certainly that's good information. I think that's the case, if I'm not mistaken, but. Okay. Yeah.
If it's appropriate.
Yeah, okay, please.
So I was trying to see if I had the inventory here. I have all the caps, but I didn't print the inventory part. But if my memory serves me correctly, I think it was in boundary in the original. Was the freeway included?
No.
Okay.
It includes San Pablo or 80 is my understanding.
Okay. I remember an inventory that included it and then one that excluded it, and we went with. So at that time, that was the best methodology that was available, and people fiercely fought about whether to include or exclude pass-through trips. But then nobody was accounting for the pass-through trips because nobody. So, but the conversation did come up about we should be responsible for the trips that we generate outside of our community. I remember that conversation, and we were dismayed that we weren't being kind of honest and reflecting our impact all the way. Once we cross the border, we're free to drive however far we want, kind of thing. So the inbound-outbound model with MTC is just a model. It's not as precise, and you can't do it annually, so it's got its shortcomings, but it is kind of answers that question. So from the perspective of magnitude, it helps for that. El Cerrito, in particular, has not switched over because both methodologies is basically the same. For some reason, it ends up being very close, so they decided not, I think. They may have changed their mind, but the last I spoke to them. But everybody else in the county has been doing the inbound, outbound method. And to the point about inconsistency with the baseline, our recommendation is that you go back and redo the baseline
Okay,
in
that
the
was
same
it.
methodology so you can do trend lining.
Is that what other communities are doing? I'm kind of curious how they're dealing with this.
Yeah, that's what they try to do,
Okay.
if the data is available. If you pick 2005 as the baseline proxy, then more data, at least from MTC, is more readily available. Berkeley struggles with 2000 as their baseline, and if we keep a 2004, it might be a little bit harder, but again, it's modeled though. So some of the conversations with MTC is just use a projection between our modeled years, which is, the models aren't meant for inventory purposes, they're for projection purposes, but it's the best that we have to reflect the cross boundary. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good clarification. But the upshot of that is that if you look at the percentages now, the mobile becomes a larger chunk of like 2015. If you look at mobile versus the sum of these, this is like now 30 versus 36. So transportation is still well above buildings. In the old methodology, it was reversed, and we were saying we need to focus on buildings and natural gas. Now it's reversed. So it is a very important conclusion and finding impacting on where we may prioritize efforts. Okay. All right. So another,
It also,
yes.
things that you can do something about versus things that you may not be able to do.
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing is that there's a difference in the baseline value, so we decided as a committee to take out Western Forge and Flange, so that was an official decision, at least recorded in the committee's minutes. So the staff update did not take out Western Forge and Flange, so that changes the starting point. So if you took out Western Forge and, if you didn't take out Western Forge and Flange, then it would be this number. If you took it out, the number would be lower. I forget the exact number, like maybe 79,000. So it changes the baseline year. And that changes the conclusion because you're comparing now the reductions to a different baseline. Okay, so these are the exact changes. So with Western Forge and Flange, it was 69,000 under the old transportation methodology, and taking out Western Forge and Flange, it was about 66,000, so about a 3,000 ton difference. Okay. All right, so this is just, this I can skip. This was just stating that the PG&E data here is only through 2011, so it's not particularly useful for recent years. Okay. All right, so that's the first phase, is just a comment on the staff inventory that, we had wanted to bring in, earlier, but it has been delayed. The second part of this is just to give an update on what we've been tracking with the old transportation methodology within the Sustainability Committee. So the differences here are that it has the old transportation methodology. It uses the baseline year as 2004 and not 2005, and it does not include Western Forge and Flange, so that has been taken out. Okay. And so this is the bottom line here. So this is the new data. So this is the large drop that I alluded to. There's a large drop in 2014 in overall emissions. That's really driven by this huge drop in natural gas emissions in yellow. 2014 was the warmest year on record. Unfortunately, 2015 became the warmest year after that. And this January has been unbelievably warm, for me at least. So this is the data, these 2 points, and this is the new data point, 2015. So the question is, what do we do after that in terms of a projection? Do we increase, do we extrapolate this line, or do we assume that these were anomalous years? So if I assume that this is anomalous, then I bounce this back to the trend line, more or less, and I'm projecting it outward. And in this case, we're 16.3% below the 2004 baseline, which is falling short of the 25% target, okay, under that set of approximations. Okay. However, if you are assuming that the climate has shifted, so here are the 2 points, and I'm just basically continuing that downward trend, then we're meeting the inventory of the goal is 25% reduction. So the climate is a big wild card, clearly. And it doesn't seem quite right that we should take credit and say we're on track and we're meeting our missions. We should probably, redefine what it means to meet our target, or perhaps, as Mia is suggesting, look more at programmatic and metric data, like how many BEVs were we able to deploy, or how many PV systems, or how many electric water heaters. So this is kind of the bottom line here, and the numbers in this memo are, there are some nitty-gritty numbers here. So if you look at the staff update, the reduction is, let's see how to read this, 20.9% reduction from 2004 versus in this update, it's 17.9%. So we're talking about a few percentage points difference between the staff and our treatment, mainly due to Western Forge and Flange being taken out in our case. So the reductions in our case for the Sustainability Committee are 17.9% in 2015 versus 20.9% for the staff. So a difference of about 3%. Okay, so what is the bottom line here? So again, I and the committee do not want to get stuck in paralysis with all these different numbers and percentage reductions, but at the least, I think we should communicate to council that there are these ranges of differences, and it's very, very fluid in that we cannot communicate with certainty that we're on target or not. If we take climate change into account, it looks like we're on target, but if we don't take that into account, we're pretty far off target, the first plot that I showed you. So at the least, I think we should show this plot, because this is the Sustainability Committee's best estimate based on all the data to date. So I think within the committee, we just need to be fair, and I think that's how I'm seeing the fairest treatment, is that we have this range of projections, and it will very, very much depend on the baseline year and the baseline assumptions. So that's pretty much what I have. But Nick, did you want to add anything to that?
No. Again, I think, kind of again, I like the presentation we had early on. The eye on the prize is really net zero, right? So again, we've got this, our local climate or our regional climate is changing kind of to our advantage because we burn a lot of gas to stay warm in the winter. Does that mean, hey, we're off the hook? Kind of, we can just ride this and who cares? If you're going towards zero, yeah, then you still care. So really, my thoughts on this was it's sort of the future projection. Are we going to get back on sort of a normal climate and therefore not really hit the target? Or will we get the advantages of warm winters and sort of slide into our target? But either case, we want to trend down as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And that, I guess that's what I'm kind of, this drives me towards what's happening with CAP 2.0, rather than getting into a bunch of analysis and all this other stuff. It's like, well, what would Albany look like as a carbon neutral city as much as possible? And that's going to happen there. How can we help our citizens move towards that? What can they do now or plan towards and everything? So, yeah, I don't know if we want to tell this story to the city council. It's an interesting story, and it really speaks to kind of where we're at. And I think we all know it because we watch the news and we see what's happening and this wild swings, and people misinterpret it, as in fact our own president has. So, I'm not, this sort of leads to, what do we tell our city council as far as what's happening? And maybe putting in the context of the larger picture of getting to this ultimate goal is a clearer way to kind of put it. I mean, you can impact that effort by projecting that out. If you're wrong on this, and the climate starts wildly doing all sorts of things, if you haven't gone to zero, you haven't really done anything. So, well, then it's all, what is it? We've got mitigation, and then the other thing, which I'm forgetting, accommodation? No.
Adaptation.
Adaptation. It's all adaptation at that point.
Okay, other comments from the committee or questions?
Yeah, I think the other thing is that as there's warmer winters, there's warmer summers. And if this trend keeps continuing, we have to be more concerned about more people adding air conditioning. And so then all these achievements that we can say we've made will go away if there's an equal increase in air conditioning usage. And then also bringing up what we've talked about before about implementation tracking, just keeping it in mind as we talk about CAP 2.0, how we want to make these changes, and that there's so much that we've gone into all about the metrics and how we're going to do it and the methodology and really what's going to be the most effective way and most efficient way for the next time.
That's a great point about air conditioning potentially being an additional source of new demand. However, that's electricity demand, and the electricity carbon intensity is steadily decreasing because of state RPS, or renewable portfolio standards, whereas for every marginal unit of natural gas, you get full pollution, full carbon pollution, so that's the difference there. And also, just on a technical note, there's more warming projected than cooling, just on a magnitude level. So, but that's a great point.
Going back to your point, Nick, and I'm far from an expert in any of what you're talking about here, but what do you present to the council? I mean, I think what is the takeaway here is that in some ways, this is really not a point estimate. This is really a range. And so I think, with the council, you want to communicate what are the small number of takeaways you want them to kind of internalize and apply to their thinking as they go forward. So obviously you can lose them really quickly in a lot of detail here, but if you want to take away that, there's this variability, here's the factors that drive it, here's what they want to think about, I think that could be useful to them.
Yeah, I think so. I guess that's what I was trying to say, but I didn't communicate as well as you did. I think in sharing this data with Peggy, I think council may glaze over a bit if they see a plot like this, so something which potentially can be easier to grasp. And the other comment from Peggy was, well, what's the so what? So if we are off track, which we may be, according to this plot, we are off track, then what is the lowest hanging fruit that we could pursue? Is it LED lighting? Is it more electric vehicle charging stations? What is it exactly? And is there a way that we could help depict that, like some bars or something, or some wedges or something like that? So that was her feedback, which I thought was good feedback. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
I would say that I agree with, let's not get hung up on whether it's, we're 8% or 9% below where we're supposed to be, or we're at where we're supposed to be. I think talking to them about how the approach we intend to take in 2.0 is going to be more focused on, particular measures. Because if you look at something like that, and somebody in the council said, okay, how much of that reduction is related to anything in the cap versus, the climate or some other conditions that have caused that? We can't answer that question. We can speculate. And the point being, like you said, so that could change in 5 years, where we think we've made it, now we're off again because of changes in the climate or other factors.
Well, for me, this is saying that there's a range over which we can look, and we can quote that range for how far we are from the 2020 goal. And excluding the effects of climate warming, we're not on track. So I think that's a key message. And so I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves and say, let's move on to CAP 2.0 and let's focus on these other things. But this is the near-term target, and it's not 2020 yet. So what can we do to foster greater adoption and deployment of whatever it may be, ZEVs, solar PV, energy efficiency upgrades, electric water heaters down the list, or LEDs. So I think that would be the message that I would bring, or I would, suggest bringing to council.
Yeah, I think there's also, I mean, you look at this and you see, those colored zones, actually tap your screen.
Right.
You can see how much is per what those areas, and you can see transportation is kind of flat, so there's a great opportunity to, and again, the transportation metrics are models, so maybe, that's also something that's questioned up, but there's an opportunity to rapidly affect those if people changed their modes or types of transportation quickly. I mean, you can see right there when the climate gets better, the gas goes away. So the more you can reduce, so that also speaks to the more we can buffer structures and where we live from just the weather, the better they're going to perform. Anyway, I mean, it can kind of be used as a tool to show here, that's how we're focusing in on it. I think the other thing is, which I had always kind of hoped when I started here is that, I mean, Albany's small and, what's the big impact with a larger region, blah, blah, blah. But we can, if we can be highly successful, we can also be a role model or show how certain things can be brought about at least a small municipal level, which could scale. And, it can have other impacts if you can show, look, we're a very livable community and we're headed towards, this kind of life, and we're not all dying here or having to, destroy our cars or whatever. So I think there's an opportunity to actually be, to create change through being change in that sense. So
I think that was one of the responses on MIA's survey is why are cities pursuing CC 2.0, and I think one of them, maybe the third reason, was for this leadership and this vision. Are there any comments from the public on this topic? Or, I lost you, but if there are, now's a chance. Yeah.
I think what, I'm assuming Councilmember McQuaid, okay, suggested of following this up with so what? Like, what do you want me to do about it? This is your opportunity. If you're going to present this once, I think it's your opportunity to say, this is what we want you to do. So I would have that conversation first and figure out, what's the ask? This should fuel political will. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, thank you.
And actually, I think the ask is going to be 2.0's fund us, right? Or give us as much as you can to keep pursuing this and to get this information out and to engage the community and to make Albany even more sustainable, and with the ultimate goal of this carbon neutral. It's all that stuff is what we're producing, and we do it in reaction to the environment, but we also do it by improving how we live. So, but I think that's a good point. We should work out exactly how that's presented. That's really critical, because that's obviously, what do we do? It's going to be the response. Hopefully not, do we care? I think we care. We had that conversation, right, with Peggy and Nick, so.
Okay, so I think that's it for my presentation on this topic. So I will unplug and replug here. So it's back on this. Should be back. Okay, the next item is 6.4, discuss possibility of becoming a task force and/or updating the committee focus.
Yeah, so this item was requested by Chairway and Vice Chair Peterson, I think related to a conversation they'd had with some council members. Staff prepared a memo to guide your discussion, and I can bring up each of those items depending on which conversation you want to have first. But I'll let Max and Nick explain a little bit more about the intent of the item.
Do you want to?
Yeah, well, I'll just, I'll give you a break. So, I think the kind of the driver on this was some frustration, I don't know, Max and I have had, but maybe the committee has had, and just trying to get certain things through city council and actually feel like, hey, we made recommendations, and then they fall through and become actual policies in the city. And there's been kind of limited success with that. Peggy and Nick talked to us, I think just realizing that, wanting to sort of break it through and make some suggestions. And one of the suggestions I think Peggy made was that, well, maybe you need to be, because we did also talk about a lot of the different agendas we get here on the Sustainability Committee have a lot of sort of tangential things that seem to draw us out in other areas. And so when it comes time to focus on, what are those core things that are really going to help us meet the CAP objectives, how could we get more focused? And so the suggestion from the council members was, well, maybe you need to become, instead of a committee, a task force, which kind of threw me for a loop, because it's like, oh God, that's probably like a 3 council meeting process to undo this and redo that. So anyway, but that was an idea. I think the idea being we could be more focused, we could move with more agility, we wouldn't be having to look at all these other concepts. So I don't know, do I have that? I don't know if you want to flesh that out, but that was kind of I think.
Yeah, I think it was just an idea from Mayor McQuaid when we met with her and Vice Mayor Pilch earlier in 2017, in November, I guess. So she had suggested potentially a different format, and the reason for that was to potentially try to bring more urgency to the committee's business, and also potentially to try to energize around the community more as a task force, which has the connotation, I think, of more, there's a task at hand which needs to be completed in a timely manner. So that was the thinking. I think in subsequent discussions with the subcommittee, I think Stephanie and Nick were not necessarily in favor of moving to this format. I'm kind of, somewhat neutral. I feel that, well, I guess one proposal was that we could, if not move to a task force, we could try to reorganize or refocus the committee to focus on a smaller number of items, which I've mentioned in the last update, which is, clean vehicles adoption and electrification in natural gas, moving away from natural gas appliances to electrified appliances, and the whole CCA outreach to try to really build support for the clean option. Or if that's the default option, then maybe we don't need that effort, but really to kind of put more energy and calories around a few specific, in this case, 2 or 3 specific areas of outreach, as opposed to looking at, because I feel that my own perspective is that we're looking at a lot of things and we're kind of broad, but not necessarily going deep. So I'm suggesting we go kind of narrow and deep moving forward, because I think these are the big, especially if our transportation emissions have doubled, and as of September of last year, that's the big enchilada. So, of course, I think Stephanie was raising, concerns about equity and renters versus owners of homes and all that. So those things need to be taken into account. But I'm somewhat neutral on this, so we just wanted to open it to the committee to just share the proposal from the mayor, from Peggy, just to get your thoughts, if you saw merit in that proposal, or if you felt it made sense to refocus the committee or to focus down, kind of echoing what Mia said in her presentation. So just opening the floor to any comments or thoughts on that.
question I have, just to make sure I understand this. So in Albany, because our council members, I assume, are unpaid except for per diem, the council members don't sit on any of the committees, right? All the different committees besides sustainability and other committees are all appointed residents that then, yeah, okay. Because I mean, as I think about this, that's part of the challenge. I mean, that's kind of the source of the council committee disconnect. I guess maybe my other question is, and I don't know if you have a perspective from the other committees, but how much of is this issue we're talking about, how much do the other committees run into it, or what are the things that other committees have done to kind of address it or try to be a little bit more in sync with the council or kind of have more influence on council?
They're looking at me.
You look like the sage.
You go to a lot of
I go
committee
to
and
a lot of-
commission meetings.
I think that, I think every commission and committee struggles from time to time with the individual members having one set of priorities and the council having maybe a slightly different perspective on it, and that's okay. And I think in many cases the council appreciates that. What I think is a little bit unique about your situation now that stands out in my mind, my first reaction to it is other committees generally take a pretty broad perspective on their subject area, and it feels like, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're trying to focus in a little bit more on a particular thing, or a couple of particular things.
I think that's right. Yeah, at least from speaking for the CAP subcommittee, so the three of us within the CAP subcommittee I think we reached that consensus, yes.
So that's just a general observation. I'm trying to think of a particular example off the top of my head. I think of the committees and commissions that I attend, I don't think they've had this kind of a discussion in the last few years. The Traffic and Safety Commission is staffed by our department, and the Planning and Zoning Commission is also.
Where did the Sanctuary City movement sort of come out of? Was that out of
That
the?
was Social and Economic Justice
So did that issue kind of come in and then dominate, and they just focused on it as a focus group, or how did that roll through?
I wasn't directly involved in most of that, although I sat through some of those discussions. I think it came. I think that came out of the national politics, really more than anything else. That suddenly this was an issue that emerged with the Trump administration, and both the commission and the community simultaneously and council became very energized about that very, very quickly.
So the focus in that committee just went to that naturally because they didn't need to worry about it was being ignored or anything. I mean, not that we feel being ignored, we just feel like there needs to be more urgency. I think what we were thinking is more urgency on achieving the CAP goals and moving the city towards, I think, more like carbon neutrality or away from carbon as much as possible.
Now that you use the example of that commission, that is an example of a commission that, at council request, has become more focused. They were interested in a lot of different things, and I wouldn't call it a distraction, but they got spread pretty thin. And I think the council said to them, here are the three things, this was a couple of years ago, here are three things that we want you to work on, and just focus on these for a while. So that I'm sorry, I'm giving you a random or rambling answer that answers in both sides of the question. But
so I'm kind of curious with just the other committee members. I mean, I have my own personal opinion, but just as far as changing our whole kind of title and composition to address the urgency of reducing carbon emissions, does that resonate with people, or is it kind of because I have some thoughts afterwards. I just wanted to let everybody get that out.
Well, I guess the thing I'm struggling with is when I look at the memo and you look at the alternatives, I don't see we're not going to ever become a board or even a commission. And so when you look at that range of the other activities, except for the committee, they're all more temporary kind of ad hoc things. And so I'm not sure if that's the intended direction to go in. I mean, in some ways, it's great that we have a sustainability coordinator, and whatever happens with this committee, we're still going to have a sustainability coordinator, but that's sort of a staff function. It seems to me that you know, without this group, where's kind of the resident interface with staff on this whole topic? So how do you do that? You know, and I think that, and I'm going to ramble for just a moment, but I'll keep it brief, is that I completely agree that focusing on sort of a very short list of things is a way to be more effective and get more things done. On the other hand, the subject matter that we're dealing with is so incredibly broad, you don't want to lose that as well. And I guess it almost gets me thinking about, just to throw this out for discussion, you know, maybe there's almost like you can mash these up a little bit, where maybe you decide, well, if we want to have a task force on a particular thing, you create a task force because we're going to do this one thing, and we'll bring together a committee and other people and kind of focus that way. But we still have a committee to kind of provide that broader view.
That's exactly where
Yeah,
I'm
I think
going.
that's what.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Robert and Samantha?
I agree with that position. I think we should stay as a committee and focus on fewer things. I think that's the best approach. And we could have still subcommittees to study various things, to work on various projects.
Yeah, I had this similar sense. This is also my second meeting, so I can't say a lot about how things have
Veteran.
changed. But the other thing is that I think not just narrowing it, but making them more actionable, and that we have a lot of long-term things, and so successes feel very small when, well, this is going to happen in 3 months, hopefully. And so choosing things that are going to happen and setting a time for it instead of just having months and just a general idea of what's happening.
My feeling about this is that I don't think this is the answer to the frustrations that the committee has faced. I think there are other sources of that frustration, other reasons for that. Don't think the structure has anything to do with it. I think changing the structure to something with less authority, like a task force, would be a big mistake. I agree with basically what Ron was saying, that I think that, yes, we should be focusing on certain things, but not to the exclusion of others. The topics that we deal with the city, if there's a development like we got involved with the UC project, though not effectively, those are the kind of things should be coming before the Sustainability Committee to review development projects, to review other types of issues in the city that may not be related to the cap. It could be a plastic bag ban. It could be, other types of things that are not related to climate, but are related to pollution issues or protecting citizens from chemicals or different kinds of things. So I think this would be a big mistake. I like the idea, Ron's suggestion of task force. That's what I was thinking as well when I was looking at this, that that's appropriate for CAP 2.0, to form a task force, get other people from the community involved. We did that the first time around. When we did the first CAP, there were people from the community that came to the meetings, that got involved. And I think that's the way to go. We've got lots of residents in Albany that have expertise in this field, by evidence of people on the committee, and there are others that would want to get involved. So I think what we should be doing is addressing why we're not getting things done, not changing our structure.
I find it a little bit curious why we would want to focus a task force on planning for CAP 2.0 rather than taking action and doing outreach now. So if we go back to this document, if you can scroll down and make the document a little bit larger. If folks read, just the first paragraph here. It's just at the very start of the memo, the background.
Oh, you want the background?
Yeah. So the background here is what's in this book, the Board, Commission, and Committee Handbook. And so the first paragraph is that we're established to advise the City Council, which I think we're certainly doing, But the second paragraph is something which I question we're doing at all. The Sustainability Committee is tasked with providing leadership, technical assistance, and education and outreach to members of the public, schools, local businesses, and city agencies on innovative programs to promote environmental sustainability through all these measures. I don't think we're doing that at all, are we? That's what I think we should be doing. So I think it's functional, and whether or not it's structural, that's fine. Maybe it's not structural at all, but I think we've moved away from this. This sounds like ACRAT to me, which was kind of, maybe we didn't need to start that group, but this is what I think we should be doing, in my opinion. And I think we should be focusing on one or two of those things in that list in the last two lines and not all 8 of them. It's just too much. So that's what I would like to see from the committee. And whether it's a committee or a task force, we should be doing this. We should be providing leadership. We should be providing innovative programs. At least that's what we were trying to do with UUT, but we didn't really follow through on the outreach, I think, is the problem. So that's, I'd like to take a strong position on that. And I would rather not say, oh, I mean, it's great to enlist community members for CAP 2.0, but we're still in 1.0. We're still in a battle. I just showed data suggesting we're 16.3% versus 25% goal. That's a 60% mark, or whatever that percentage is. 15 out of 25, 3 out of 5, that's 60%, right? That's a failing grade. You go to Cal Berkeley, that's a D or a E. So, and I don't feel any sense of urgency on the committee on this today, none. I think all the focus is on CAP 2.0, which is super exciting, and I'm super excited about that, but this is my position. So, and I'd say it's in the charter. We're not inventing anything new. We're kind of refocusing on what's in this book. So that's what I would say we need to do. And so that may mean, we're focused on outreach. Nick has been passionate about that. I think others on the committee are very interested in that. Tom, Janet, I mean, we've all been super interested. And, Claire has been doing a lot in the past. So anyways, maybe I'll just shut up now. But Nick, you wanted to.
No, I kind of agree with that. I think part of, we can only do so much because we meet once a month, and we actually had fewer meetings last year. So the idea is, how can we focus ourselves? And I agree. I mean, becoming just a task force, we don't need to do that. That'd be a mistake. It actually waters everything down, and then it's almost like it disappears when the task is over. So I totally agree with Tom. It's like, no, we should be a committee, but we need something to get us a little more focused and passionate about engaging the community, because the community isn't really here, although they're out there. How can we do that and engage more, and feel like we're having impact and successes that then would actually be, I mean, we may not see them directly reflected in the inventory, but we'll see them reflected in things that are happening around the city. So, I think it's a real challenge because people have a lot going on. Things are shifting radically. We've got half the population in Albany as renters, and the whole rental situation is getting catastrophic. So, it isn't like we're going to do this forever, but if we could just, what I was hoping is we could agree to focus on getting this information out and having these priorities and seeing how far we could get on it, initiating these programs. So it would be, so the idea was stay as a committee, make some task force that back up the primary, where we see we're going to get the primary bang for the buck, and then push those. So trying to get more, I would put it, change in modes of transportation away from internal combustion engines or burning gasoline and fuel. Moving away from natural gas consumption, and that gets into the BEDO and making your house better, and maybe doing some research and promoting electrification of even heating systems, which we don't know a whole lot about, but people are doing remodelings all the time, and this is a time to capture them and educate them. And then the last is really promoting, I think this is our biggest bang, is going to be for when the community power comes out, that people do buy in to as large a percentage of renewable as possible. And that we actually promote that and do an outreach and get community engaged. So all that'll take effort and trying to get volunteers together and other things, and the goal would be to prioritize that. That was kind of my thought. And not to say that I mean, other things will come up, and there could be a development or a policy that we need input on. It's not like we'll say, go away, we're not going to say anything, but that we just have this primary focus for these task force entities or subcommittees. You can call them subcommittees. Any thoughts?
We have subcommittees now, right? So what's different that you're suggesting?
Well, I think you're here, the subcommittee that did the Arts and Greens, put an Arts and Greens Festival. I don't know anything else that really happened out of subcommittees. I mean, we've mulled over a lot of stuff and talked about CAP, and actually, Stephanie would be very angry at me. She put together the whole thing for the inventory, but again, that was kind of running down a road because no one wanted to do a veto. So again, the idea is to get more focused and really accomplish something. I mean, if people are happy in their subcommittees and feel they're accomplishing things.
I guess what I would propose to the committee is that we stay as a committee, since it seems like it's the preference of most of the members to stay as a committee. I don't think anyone's voiced a strong preference to shift to a different structure as a task force, but that we can revisit the subcommittees, because I think what I'm hearing from Nick is that it may make sense to form some of the subcommittees around these key areas that we've identified, like cleaner transportation or more electrified end uses, for example, heat pumps, for example. So, but I don't think we can do that here today, but maybe in the next meeting we can have that. So maybe we can carry forward that. But I would like people to maybe just read that section, just to see if you think is that the right charter for us? Because maybe that's not the right charter. Maybe it's too hard because we have the Brown Act, and to really do outreach, we need, more members. But to me, I would love it if we could embrace that paragraph there, which is in the handbook.
I'm all for that. I mean, because we've talked about this for a long time, about changing behavior is what we're about. And I mean, the CAP is just a framework for that. But the point is to educate businesses and residents about how to make changes so that they are living healthier lives and for themselves and the planet. And so I agree with that.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking back to the graphs we were just looking at, and instead of thinking it's a failing grade, it's we have 2 more years, like what can we do from now, and using that to build up the sense of urgency. And I think also that idea of like the energy comes from outreach, because I think there's people who care about it, but don't even know we exist or don't know what happens here.
Absolutely, right. Okay, so I think no change for the committee, at least in the structure, but if we can add that as an agenda item.
Yeah, I think we'd be happy to bring a memo with some potential subcommittees too. We can talk to
Great.
the chair and vice chair to
Great, okay.
develop something.
All right. Is there any comment from the public on this one? Okay.
I think, Tom, you were on the task force that originally formed this committee, so it may be that it would come back around to, we need a committee for this, if you were to go to a task force, so I don't know. That's how the last task force ended.
Full circle, okay. Okay, so the last item, I think, is the selection of chair and vice chair for 2018. So the recommendation is to select a new chair and vice chair. So I think I'd like to nominate Nick as the chair, the new chair, and I would like to, step aside So that would be my nomination. Oh, sorry, didn't have a chance to thank Mia.
So Max and I have talked about it. I'm more than happy to, I think it's time he was allowed to step down. I guess, Tom, you've done this before, and running the same person along for a while. I'm happy to step in, and I don't know if I'll do as good a job as Max did, but I certainly try. But if anybody else is interested, I'm more than happy to nominate them. So, is anybody else interested?
I second the nomination.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Nick would do a great job. I've really enjoyed working with you over the past few months. And I think you have a great experience from, being an architect and being a resident. So there's also the vice chair. So are there any nominations for that?
I'd like to nominate Stephanie, even though she's not here.
I was thinking the same thought.
Yeah, I was
Has
thinking.
anyone discussed this with her? She's
Well, I
the
did,
vice chair?
yes, I did ask her at the lab about a week ago, and I think she said she would consider it. So she didn't agree, but she didn't say no either. So,
Considers good enough for me.
so I don't know
Recruiter.
what the procedure is there, if we could have her as, our vice chair elect, or
Well, and
just.
I mean,
Just
I
designate
don't know
her.
if anybody else is interested in stepping up. I mean, I was a vice chair. I think I just backed you up periodically, and I stepped in for our city council meeting once and said a bunch of wrong things, I think. So I think, vice chair isn't that demanding a role if anybody wants to step in, and even if you're new, so.
I'd be interested, but again, it's my second meeting, so I don't know
Yeah.
what I'm taking on or.
More of a backup capacity.
I think, just to clarify, if we were to decide we want to select Stephanie as vice chair and then she declined, we would just come back to the committee to make a successor, right?
I think that would be fine.
So would we even, can we even vote on her with her being absent, and then say pending her accepting?
Well, I wouldn't even say that. She can refuse
Oh,
or resign as the vice chair.
okay.
I don't think you do it contingent.
So we need a motion?
Okay, so,
Are these separate motions for chair then vice chair, or are they together?
Separate.
okay, I make the motion to have Nick Peterson to be the new chair of the Sustainability Committee.
I second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion is passed.
I move that Stephanie be the vice chair.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Okay,
And
so
that's
the motion is passed. I think it's effective for the next meeting, is that correct?
Mhm.
Sorry, okay.
Right.
Okay, so at the next meeting.
Thank you, Max, for
you, Max.
doing a great job as chair.
It was a pleasure. It was a
Or
pleasure.
last 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That's a long duration.
Yeah. So, all right, so that concludes our meeting. So for future agenda items, let's see. So I think this first one is really good, the discussion of community outreach and engagement. Definitely if we could have that one.
Yes, we wanted to bring it this month, but we just had too many items.
That's right. And then the home energy assessment pilot, that would be super interesting. And, yeah, the RFP. So I think all those items are fine. I don't know if there's a new greenhouse gas emissions inventory update for next
Kind
time.
of covered that, didn't we?
Probably not, right?
I think I just forgot to take that off the future agenda items
Okay,
list.
and then another one, if there's time, is just circling back to the task, the subcommittees, yeah. In case we want to reconfigure those or refocus those, which I think would be timely, yeah. Anything else for future agenda items?
At the beginning, you said something about the city of Boulder.
Yes, so that could be part of the pilot program result update in the context of what's going on in Berkeley and, potentially Boulder. Yeah, so
think another future agenda item is the Arts and Green Festival. We're not putting one on in 2018 because we never heard back from Park and Rec.
So Claire, do you know if that's happening or not?
So I talked to Nicole Almagar about it. So there's no way of doing anything this year. So the idea is to talk about how we'd want to do it in the future, if we want to do it in the future. And so I think it's connected to the broader discussion about community engagement, education.
Right. Yeah, that's true. So
What's
maybe
the
that's,
appropriate-
right, so maybe that's part of that
Yeah,
larger discussion. Good, that's a good tie-in. Yep, okay.
because I mean, yeah, it could be, I mean, that's events.
Okay, so I think we're done for this evening. Thank you again, and thank you again very much to staff. So the next meeting will be, again, third Wednesday of next month.
Thank you.